All right, we're rolling. We're back. And guess what, guys? We have another guest.
Well, Lily, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? We know that you are a recording artist.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, I'm a songwriter, recording artist. I met Luis at Berkeley.
Where? What?
Uh, what? I majored in music business and uh, I geek out about that. I worked for several years in event production, and now as a songwriter, I'm very passionate about the publishing side of music, and yeah, that's me.
Nice. And then
Well, I have to say something. I have to say something because
Yes.
I'm proud of it. Lady, she's also Brazilian.
Brazilian
A
blood. We are going to discuss a little bit of copyright law and the way that sampling affects the music, the artist, and the people who hold the rights to these recordings. And we'll see where we go.
So
Right.
there's two different rights associated with a song.
Hmm.
There's the master and then there's the songwriting. So a recording is something that is a copyright, and then there's also the intellectual property of the music and lyrics that were written, right? And the two main usual people who exploit that for an artist, when I say exploit, I mean like they're,
Monetize.
monetizing, and yeah, the label on the master side and the publishing company on the publishing side, the songwriting, right? And so yeah, publishing, master, those are two words that would be used. um and when people are sampling, of course there's like the difference between, like, there's people taking an actual piece of a track and throwing it in a song, and then there's like somebody does a chorus where they reference another song. Not a chorus, like sorry, I meant to say like bridge, a piece of the song. There's that Halsey song, you guys know, when she does the Justin
Oh,
Timberlake
is it Halsey?
thing.
That's how we say that name? I thought it was
Yeah.
Hasley or something.
Her real name's Ashley, and she
Oh,
changed up the
Ashley.
letters.
Oh, it's an anagram.
But basically, just to say, like, I think that the good thing about being an independent artist is that, yes, you have less resources, but you have all the control of, like, where the money's coming to and the transparency to know, like, this is what's happening. Whereas, like, with labels, for, the recording music industry isn't the oldest industry. Like, we've been recording music since, what, like, the early 1900s? I don't know.
Us
the
as a
exact year.
species?
Yeah.
I guess. There's even. I forget the history of recorded music, but I remember even being the concept of having a piece of a line that's written and then it
Mhm.
moves a little piston that then creates a sound somewhere else. It's actually a way. It predates the 20th century.
Oh,
I
wow.
think, as a concept, or maybe I just saw that in a work of fiction and I'm getting my cables crossed. But yeah,
But
it's fairly recent.
It's fairly new, and the whole purpose of copyright law is to, like, give people incentive to create, so they have enough time to use things, but to also not limit creativity, because the idea that only so much can be created, we're inspired by other things. There's limits to these things, right? Like, so the traditional one is your life plus 70 years that you could give an inheritance. And then it's a little bit different when it's work for hire, which now we get complicated. But basically, just to say that in the beginning, labels worked very much like, it was much more of, I guess it's always been a well-oiled machine in business, but like everyone had a different role to play, almost like a little employee that got paid to do something. There's a singer, there's the songwriters, and in a lot of things, the people who weren't the creators, who have the money, are always the ones who also come out with the most advantage. I think similar to movie studios,
Yeah.
and actors, and the creators always get the worst end of the thing.
Copyright works a lot like patents work, right? You have rights for an idea, and in order for ideas not to be resold and profited off of without crediting the original person who has the idea, you register these ideas, right? So the industry kind of decided that it was a good thing for the creative process to protect said ideas and attribute these ideas to the person who originally, quote unquote, generated. Now, it becomes a complex problem, but fundamentally that's what we're talking about. Do we agree that the possibility or the chance of safeguarding your own idea as an original idea that you can then say, hey, this is mine, therefore I should have a cut of however this is marketed? Do you guys think that's a good idea?
Yes, but I think that sadly what ends up happening is that so basically a great example of this is like hip hop, I think in being in the 90s if I'm not mistaken, like started this like sampling older records, and in that practice there was what the idea was, oh, it's fair use, it's only a few seconds, and we're taking, um, a bunch of pieces of music. I wish I remembered the name of the song, but there was some song that like specialists today said it would have like you'd have to charge $145 per download of this song to make it afford all the samples it used back in the day in this golden era of hip hop. But then labels started being like, like that's not cool. You need to pay up. And they found some kind of loophole to make this something to monetize on, which you'd say, okay, that's good for creators, right? And on one hand, yes, it is. Like they are getting some payouts. But what happens is so there's like the way a major label deal works, right? It's like it's worse than it's like I'm giving you $100,000. That's your advance, let's say. And with that, you record your music, whatever you don't spend, you keep. There's a lot of different versions of this, but the funding and all these expenses the label provides it.
Right.
Artist makes record, then the label releases it, and then they say, hey, you get, which has gone up over the years. It used to be around like 4%, and now it's more like 25. But let's say that you get 10%. This is like maybe like 90s figures.
The artist gets 10%,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Artist gets 10%. But then you think, okay, cool. So I get 10% of every, I get the album's $10. I get $1 off every album. Cool. But no, because then they're like, no, but you need the 100,000 or however much the expenses were to create your work, or we funded your tour. All the expenses need to be paid back first. Okay, so fine. Then after $100,000 worth of sale, I'll make my dollar per record. And they're like, no. All the expenses need to be paid back on your dollar. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Right.
that's the very predatory.
It's really predatory, but it exists to this day.
to this day.
So they're basically investing a certain amount of money, and they want that money back
10 times over.
10 times over.
So they've already made that money, right? Because now, like, they've sold 10,000 records at $10. They've made $100,000, right? But they're saying, no. We need to make, would it be $1 million? They'd have to make $1 million before you break before you break that 100,000.
Right.
And let's be honest, they have millions of dollars of expenses. I'm saying 100,000 to give like a really easy example.
Right. No, it's good. Yeah, round it up.
So the issue with samples is then people get stuck in these, like, it's also they'll sign people like, hey, we're going to give you a 1-album deal, and if we like you, we have the option to keep signing you back. And they always say options because so they don't promise you anything. And they're like,
Okay.
8 more albums. That was something very common. Prince was in one of those. He
was very outspoken about that.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
That's why.
it was really bad. Yeah. So then what happens? Okay, now let's say Prince's song gets sampled. What labels are doing is instead of getting this money and getting the natural split, they're saying, hey, you're actually not recouped from that record from 10 years ago or more. We're not promoting it. We're not doing anything for it to make more money. But now it's been sampled, and we're gonna keep recouping your expenses. And so artists just keep not seeing $1 from what they created.
Right.
And this is sadly really, really, really common. So it's not that I think samples shouldn't be paid for, but it's gotten to a point that they're so expensive that only major label artists can afford to get that kind of clearance. And it's also not really, making it to everyone in the way that it should.
Right.
That's my
So
really long answer.
my 2 cents on this subject, I would like to first understand the process of sampling is something that you just do at your home organically. You grab an album, you spin it, you record something on used to do is recording on a tape, and you kind of manipulate that, and then
Old
you
school.
transform it in so much, sometimes such a way that the original work becomes irrecognizable, right? So it's really hard to go and forensically find, hey, you know where the sample comes from? It comes from this other record, but it's been slowed down, it's been pitched, it's been chopped up, and this little section, 2 seconds, became a loop. So I
Right.
think the interesting question here is to make these actual original recordings, it takes money, it takes studio time, it takes a lot of resources to produce. It's like saying, I'm going to make a movie and I'm going to use bits and snippets of, let's say, freaking that Nolan movie, the Interstellar.
Okay.
Right? How much money did Interstellar cost to make? Let's say $500 million or $100 million, and then I'm going to use a fraction of it. So proportionally, that little scene that was shot there, it cost. Let's say if it's 1% of the movie, it costs 1% of 100 million. So it costs $1 million to make just to create those scenes. Now I take this scene and I put it on After Effects and I just warp it up, and I create something that is unrecognizable to what it used to be. But that's my framework now.
Mm-hmm.
How should this be paid? I just used something that was really costly to make, transformed it, and made it into completely something original. But it still used the prime material that was technically for sale. And this is really what it boils down to, if I phrase the problem correctly. But now then there's the other side of the law called, the Fair Use Act, which if protects types of work that are transformative in nature or informative or commentary or a few other instances. So how does that fit into the first part that I just described? As in a good example, for example, people like Daft Punk. They're
Right.
amazing artists. They make music that's loved by millions, if not billions. But a lot of the times, it's what's it called? You're just chopping stuff up and mashing stuff together. You didn't really go into the studio and record the original thing, right? And you pulled from a bunch of places, and now you have this new piece of art. It's kind of the same. Have you ever seen those big pictures that turn out to be collages? And they're all collages of infinitely small pictures, right? So how much of this portrait, for example, if it's a portrait, how much of this is actual all of these works put together versus how much is this? No, this is an actual creation. My vessel for expression was just something that already existed. And those are really the big questions that are at hand. Now, the labels, because they hold the masters, they technically own they're these recordings are
What are
their
the masters?
property.
What are you talking about?
So let's say Lily Lyon
The sound
records a
recording.
song,
Okay.
right? She writes a song, and then she gives me the sheet, and I have some chords in it, and I
Right.
have lyrics, and I have a melody, and I go into the studio, and I come here, and I record.
You bring that to life.
I bring that to life. I
Boom.
come, I record,
Okay.
I record some bass, I record some drums, I record the piano, and then I publish it. This recording is what we call a master,
Okay.
right? So it's my version that's been recorded to a physical element.
And what's the difference between that and a sample?
A sample is just a subsection of
it.
this master.
Okay. Okay.
And it can be like a piece of the whole song. It can be just the drums. It can be just the bass
So a
line.
master is like when the song is already
Yeah.
fully produced.
Yes,
Okay.
but it's specifically not the song that is fully produced. It's the full production,
Okay.
which is slightly different. The reason why I'm saying this is because you tomorrow grab the same lyrics and the same melody and the same chords, and you go
Transform
record your
into
own version,
something else,
and
yeah.
now you have a different master of the same song.
Okay.
They all come to the same
Right.
intellectual, ethereal concept, which is like lyrics and melody. But you have a master of that song. I have a master of that song.
Right.
A good example is Taylor Swift. So Scooter Braun,
Scooter.
who she doesn't have a good relationship with. He manages Kanye, and she has that whole
Okay.
past with Kanye.
Right.
I don't think it's just that. There's probably more to the story that I don't know. But he bought her masters, and her old label didn't give her the option. She tried to buy back her own masters when she was free of the deal, and they purposely didn't give her the chance to buy it. She could afford it, obviously, and then they even sold it to a person that she doesn't like. So what has she been doing for the past few years? She's been re-recording because she still owns the publishing. It's her creation. So she's
Right.
been re-recording every piece of music she's ever released and putting
Why?
it out
Why?
so that because she's like, I'm going to make the money off of my creations and you're not going to. So
Okay.
he doesn't have to take down. Now there's like two versions of every Taylor
Exactly.
Swift song out there.
Okay.
And it's like crazy. She has the resources to do it, and she has so
Right.
much work.
And
But
she has the clout because then she
But
can
it-
tell her fans, hey, there are two masters on the market. Buy this one, support me. Don't buy this one because this guy negged me and just like
Right.
shut me off. And he's not a friend. And this is an amazing. It's one artist in this amazing position. But what she's really doing, she can't buy the masters back because imagine like a trading card. Like now the guy owns a trading card, he doesn't want to sell it to you, and he can take that trading card
And I
and
feel
make
like in that
copies.
case, right? I
and
feel like in
sell.
that case she has the upper hand because
She
she
does,
has
because
the
she's Taylor
image
Swift.
power. Exactly. Yeah.
most money, you could say, direct money comes from master, but more power comes from owning the publishing.
Okay.
So what is the publishing? Can you explain to us?
It's like not a physical thing. It's like I wrote this song,
So
and it's
could
the
it be like
song.
intellectual property
It's the
in a way?
intellectual
Okay.
property,
Okay.
exactly. That's exactly what it is. Whereas the sound recording is like it's like maybe not physical, but it's the sound file.
Right.
You know, so that's something it's used to be like holding
'Cause
on
I was
to
thinking
a
about
record.
that.
But
It's kind of hard to sometimes put a price on pieces of creativity. You
But
know,
there
like
is.
intellectual property. Yeah.
But the union sat down and decided, for example, if a recording plays on a radio, it nets you as an artist 9.5 cents per play. You know, that used to be the the deal that was brokered amongst the industry, amongst the people who wrote, amongst the people who held the masters, and amongst the actual artists. So and they would divide up this cake.
Those
because
numbers are curious to me too. Like who establishes that? How like what's the basis they use to?
those were negotiated. But
Okay.
but the long story short, and correct me if I'm mistaken, every radio pays for a big license, right? And think about licensing. It's the right for you to play on air any piece of recording, which has to have a catalog, right? So you have a big group of songs that you can access by paying $500,000 a year. So you take this $500,000 a year and you put this in a pool of money.
Okay.
Now this pool of money will be divided by how many amount each song gets played in that radio station. So you will have to funnel these. If you divide all the plays by the amount of hours, by the amount of artists that get to play, there's actually a limited amount of plays that you can do per day because there's only 24 hours in the day. There's only so many music segments, blah, blah, blah. Once you make all these maths and you say, hey, okay, let's divide this licensing through all the artists, they came up with a number which was 9.5 cents.
Right.
And that is a very nice way of understanding how much money you would make off of radio play. Now,
well, radio actually in the U.S. only pays PROs, and PROs are public. This is gonna. We're
Performance
really
rights
going to confuse you.
organization.
Performing rights organizations. And if this all sounds really confusing,
It's because it
are there
is.
most musicians I
Arthur.
know don't get this stuff,
Yeah.
by the way.
Right.
I'm like always sitting with my musician friends trying to like explain this to them. So they are paying on behalf of the of the songwriting, the publishing rights. So it's something that's kind of actually a little bit messed up, but radio gets away with not only in the U.S., but I think some other countries actually pay on the master. Because it's getting to a point where like there's no line. Like the whole idea of it was like basically that the differential of radio versus like a Spotify, let's say, is like, oh, people aren't doing it on demand, but then Spotify, there's all these is going so playlist oriented that like it's sporadic and random. But I feel like I'm getting into another subject, so
Yeah, a
I'm
little
gonna
bit,
come
yeah.
back a little bit.
Yeah, but that's a subject that I'm curious about too. That transition from radio to all the new media that we have
Yeah.
nowadays, like Spotify, all the platforms. You know.
So the problem at the foundation is this. If you have one radio station and you play one song, you're reaching out hundreds of thousands of people at the same time. If you're a streamer, you're one guy listening to the song. So the relationship between the amount of songs that are played, times that the song is played, versus the amount of years that people are listening at the same time, it breaks. It doesn't work. It's a totally different system.
Right.
Because you can have, the song played 1,000 times on a on a Spotify, but only one person heard it because they obsessed and they listened to it X amount, the
Right.
said 1,000 times.
Right.
But on the radio, you play one time and 100,000 people heard it. So think about it this way: everything boils down to money. And in the case of the radio, radio is paid for by what? Commercials.
Right.
It's the same as TV, same as almost
Ads.
ads pays for the world, right? So it's the corporations who find a way to get your attention through this good quality product, and in the in betweens they sneak in like, hey, also buy our stuff, and that's kind of like what funds everything. That's
Yeah.
really the reality of capitalism. And so if you with
By the way, today's
Spotify-
episode is sponsored by. I'm just kidding. We don't have a sponsor today.
so the funding for the music, how do? You also use commercials. If, for example, if you have Spotify, the free version, you get commercials. And if
Right.
you don't, now you pay a license, you pay a fee to access this
Well,
catalog of music.
the $10 a month. But Spotify is a weird one because they function a lot like a lot of these big tech companies where they're not making money. They have to pay all these labels, right, to license to have this music on their platform. And Spotify's a really weird enigma of like, so wait, let's go back a little bit. Napster was created. You've heard of Napster.
Napster, yeah. I
before
remember that
Napster-
because of the movie The Social Network.
Yes.
That
And
played by
before
Justin
Napster-
Timberlake.
MP3 was invented, which was a big.
Yeah.
It was enabled
MP3,
the sharing.
Yeah.
The little
sharing
iPods,
things. And then iTunes was like, okay, cool, we can like it was something that was meant to, help as in controlling, but it also helped them sell their devices because they're like, you're gonna buy the song and download it, and it only works on our devices. You can
Okay.
only get it from ours. I think that shortly after that might have like there might have been some other MP3s that could have been used, but I don't know if I'm actually getting that wrong now that I say it. Scratching for a second. Napster. So then when Napster came out and a lot of other file sharing, like there was LimeWire.
LimeWire, I remember that.
guys
That was
use
the one
Kazaa?
that my cousins used. I
Yeah.
never heard of Napster. But when that came out, it hurt the music industry so much. And by the music industry, I mean major labels, because
Right.
plenty of artists in the 90s, in the golden era of music, were getting shafted. They were like having like, numbers that we'll never hear of again of album sales. And artists were like, I've never made $1,
Right.
But it was like everything from the executive's ride to the studio was getting expensed at the artist's 10% or whatever. So with that shift, actually in one way helped the artist, because then artists were getting better deals with labels because they had to give like something else to the artist, or like, they want a bigger piece of the pie, so they need to give more percent, because they're like, okay, now we want your touring money. It used to be like, you don't touch touring money, but the
'Cause
only way
they weren't
that
making as much money with the
record sales.
record sales. Yeah. Okay.
Sales plummet because all of a sudden you devalue. This is actually, I don't see
People
this
are
as a
downloading
good
music
thing.
for free.
Exactly. And once
Yeah.
you teach the public that something is free, the public
It's a commodity.
hates. Like, it just devalued the value of
But
music.
the artists weren't making any money when people
regardless.
don't.
But that does not mean
Right.
that music as an entity or as a thing is more or less valuable. Think about it this
Right.
way. When was the last time you paid for news that's behind a paywall? Like the New York Times online article or the Washington Post or this or that. You're not used to paying for news. So
Mhm.
every time that paywall comes up, a lot of people, and I have no idea what the percentage is,
Close.
will just say, whatever, next, I'm going to find a free news outlet. So think about the incentives and what that does to an industry. That kind of like, if you understand the consequences of your dollar, and then when I was a kid, I couldn't care less, like I can't afford any of this. I'm, gonna take advantage of this. Everybody's doing it. What's the big deal? Well, the deal is that you're defunding these industries. You're shifting. You're making the way that they fund themselves just go upside down. So what does that create? That creates perversion of incentives, or they will just
And-
do what they have to do to survive. Whether it is, in the case of news, to start getting like clickbaity as possible, because people won't want to subscribe to their services because people are now no longer used to paying, because you at least paid for the newspaper. Here's 25 cents, and there was a print, and that's how and you still have to sell ads. You still have to put in the front page the good news that people want to hear. It's like, well, what happened? And be very flashy about it. But the music now, you think like, do you want to pay for a record? Do you want to pay for a song? Do you want to pay for this? Nobody wants to do that, and that's kind of like the consequence of this, which threw a wrench for the sales of albums, which threw a wrench this whole thing, and then now the labels.
But live shows
Like-
still make money. And that's what
That's
happened
great.
is like the artists used to keep their money from live shows. That's
Right.
why so many older artists would work themselves to the bone on the road.
Right.
Because it's the only way they were going to make money.
Touring,
And then
yeah.
but now with labels being like, okay, well actually we're going to get a cut of that too. A thing that got popular was this 360 deal. They get 25% of everything. They get everything, but then they're going to like do a more generous deal. Like you actually get a 25% royalty because we're going to get 75% of everything. And it's not always exactly like that. Everyone has a different contract and situation. But labels had to get more generous in other ways so that they could say, hey, we're also going to take from here and from there. But the truth is that and then people are like, okay, Spotify came and saved the day, but it didn't. Like Spotify was created by and for labels.
Okay.
In fact, Spotify offered up stake in their company to a lot of major labels. Spotify offered ad space, and all of this becoming part of the juicy deal to get licenses and contracts that have no transparency. And all that means is less money in the end for creatives. And labels will go out and be like, no, it's not about you artists, stop asking for a bigger piece of the pie. We need to get the pie bigger. And it's like, always blaming it like there just needs to be more money coming in.
Right.
But if you look at like the executive salaries at these major labels compared to like the top 4 executives at Warner Music made the equivalent to the top 27 songs in the entire country that year.
Okay.
Not just from that label. Like I'm talking like, I think it was like something I read, it was like, I think it was like $500 million.
Hello everybody, and thank you for watching until the end. This has been Woke Wars, and I hope you liked our conversation. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and drop a comment down below. Tell us what you'd like to hear us talk about next. Also, check out some of our other episodes. We post every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We will see you on the next one.